here, Islamic Origins. Couldn't get Lloyd de Jong, but we've got too few Lloyds. Welcome, too few Lloyds.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, you might need to explain your name to the uninitiated, or maybe not.
Well, there's too few Lloyds and too many other people. So, we
Yeah,
need more Lloyds because we've already got too many Marys.
yeah. Well, I'm going to offer an olive branch here and say that just to remind everyone that we're on different tracks. We're here to ask the question, did it happen? And there are others on different channels who are actually asking a different question, which is maybe something on the lines of is Islam sensible or not? And using different sets of arguments. And I think you can't really mix the two. Either you do the one or the other, I think. So I'm offering the olive branch. I'm calling the piece whatever, and let's bygones be bygones. We're all on the same page ultimately, even if we disagree on certain things. So there, I've done it. I've offered the olive branch. So, but obviously, I will respond to any kind of things if it's directed at me. Otherwise, I'm just going to do my own things. I think you were saying the same thing before we went on air. We're going to go do our own.
About?
Just in terms of we just go on with our own little mission kind of thing.
Find your niche. I mean, find what it is that you're good at and do that.
Yeah.
There's lots of other people doing the same thing, and that's great. But you're a pioneer, so break new ground.
Yeah. Well, on that score, I am intending to break a lot of ground here. I'm going to be nuking a few ideas, maybe not even using a pickaxe. I'm going to be making fairly big jumps, let's say. To get us started, I'm going to let's see if I can share my screen here. Let's see how we go. And it's always a bit new. Let me just see how we do this. Sorry, 1 second. For some strange, here it is now. It's working. Lloyd, can you tell me if it's if the PowerPoint has started rather than being
yes, it just has.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to be looking at Jewish links to the background of the Quran. And Lloyd, I invite you to come in with any extra nuggets and maybe if you want to share any comments in the chat, because I won't be able to see them while I'm at this.
Right.
So to begin with, our job is to try to unravel the historical origins of Islam from that of the tradition. So that's where we're at. That's my focus. That's Lloyd's focus. And there's going to be two parts to this. And this part one is, who might Salman al-Farsi be based on? So I'm not suggesting that the story of Salman al-Farsi is true, but even the best fiction is often loosely based on real people and historical events, and that's where I'm coming from. So I sometimes those who do the historical critique were painted with the kind of image of us saying that traditions are completely made out of thin air, which is not the case. We do think that there are traces within history. We don't know the full extent of it, and that's why we look to the evidence and see what we can extract from the historical background to actually rebuild or reconstruct the history. So with that out of the way, let's just take a look at what Islamic tradition says about Salman. So it's so this is from Islam Online. Okay, so this is kind of representative of the sort of things you'd find. Salman had a knowledge of both the Christian scriptures and the Quran, in addition to his earlier knowledge of the Zoroastrian religion. Salman, in fact, translated parts of the Quran into Persian during the lifetime of the Prophet. He was thus the first person to translate the Quran into a foreign language. So, true or false, anyway, this Salman guy doesn't sound like an illiterate clown. He sounds like someone who is highly knowledgeable. Like he knows Christian scriptures, he knows the Quran apparently, he has a knowledge of the Zoroastrian religion, he can translate into different languages, he's a knowledgeable guy. But is there a historical person that might match that? So first we're going to take a diversion into something that seems unconnected, and it's to do with the Pharisees of all things. You can see here typical history of the Pharisees on the right-hand side. Founded in 167 BC, dissolved in 73 AD. But to me, that's just too neat. Is the beginning and end dates true? Was there nothing before 167 BC? Such systems take centuries to develop. It is hard to believe that the roots of this didn't originate during the Babylonian exile. And certainly the work on the Talmud, both the Jerusalem and later the Babylonian Talmud, would suggest that this group didn't disband but carried on with some changes. Likewise, the Sadducees did not end with the destruction of the temples. That should be temple, not temples, obviously. A slight reformulation of a group doesn't necessarily mean an entirely new group. How does that fit with you, Lloyd? Do you think does that sound reasonable, that there might be an earlier beginning and a later continuation of any particular group, let's say?
So we don't have exact dates, I think, around the Talmud.
Yeah.
So if you look at, I mean, not specifically the Talmud, but around that, so you don't have exact dates. So there's no reason why you can't have that little bit of fuzziness there,
Yeah.
which allows for this. But also, I've said and others have said that if you talk about the Pharisees, that the Muslim imams are the Pharisees of Islam.
Yeah.
They've got the same biblical, or scriptural literalism that Jesus accused them of. So there's certainly some parallels there.
Yeah.
They've so there's something there. And looking at you said Fred Donner, look at his work.
Yeah.
Some of the work I've done, I'd say there's some connection, and so we're starting to find links we didn't see before that sort of tentatively suggest that this is a real theory.
Yeah.
There's something here.
I think for me, Lloyd, one of the biggest eye openers was a presentation you did some time ago, which looked at the origins of Sharia, and you spoke about the parallels between the Talmud and how laws were kind of developed over time, and the Sharia. And you also identified an awful lot of common terminology between the two. Putting you on the spot a little bit, but could you share with people who maybe haven't seen that some of the terminology that you noticed was similar or even identical?
Hold on. So let me just find.
Yeah.
Get the file up.
Yeah, no problem. Because I think this would be kind of helpful, because otherwise I think maybe some of what I'm going to share might seem really strange and maybe unexpected. But there's...
So what are some of the words? Hadas. To find. Yeah, you just put me on the spot there for a moment. But let me share my screen. I've got it now.
Yeah, let me
took a moment. Because I had to very quickly. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
There it is. So now, so just out of interest's sake, then what you have is Talmud versus Sharia, right? So I've got notes, but I'm not going to go to those now. The Quran also means qira'a, to proclaim, right? So to proclaim the good news, right?
Yeah.
And Torah means written law, was also known as the Korah.
Yeah.
Kara. So these are just slight variations of the same word. The sounds are different because they're the Arabic versus the Hebrew, but these are not so dissimilar. And then, of course, this was interpreted and expanded in Talmud, and in Islam, in the Sharia, you had the Sunnah in Hebrew and the Sunnah in Islam, and then you had the six major books of the Talmud, and you've got the Kitab al-Sittah, the six main books of the Hadiths, right?
Yeah.
Hadith, and in fact, if you look at the Pakistanis, they say Hadith.
Really? Wow, I didn't know that.
They say Hadith. They say with an S.
Yeah.
Right. So and we know that the S is Arabized to ta, right? You've got similarities here, Hakesh Kiyas, but also the Halacha, the legal doctrine, and the Halakha, the place where the equivalent of the yeshiva, where the Muslims went to hack out the law, right?
Excellent. Yeah.
And there were these terms, and there's more, but also the Jews used the word Quran to refer to the Jewish texts.
Yeah.
So the Jewish texts were called the Quran as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this possibly before, I mean, maybe not before, but the Jews also called their work the Quran.
Yeah.
So,
So that's a lot. That's a lot of overlap there, and it just suggests a close working together.
that is suggested by the sources that they were in the same places, and many of them would have converted and gone over. So
Yeah.
yes, and many of them were scribes or somehow involved. So yes.
Okay. So thank you for that. I'm just going to go back to where I'm at here. Right. So with that sort of out of the way, then let's look at this word Pharisee. Obviously, it's a member of an ancient Jewish sect, typically 2 centuries BC to the 1st century CE. That's the standard thing that's told to us. At least that's the visible part of them, at least. Distinguished by strict observance, but regarded as pretentious and self-righteous, at least by Jesus. And then you have the word Pharis from Old English Pharisios, Old French Pharisee, and directly from Latin Phariseus, from Greek Pharisaios, and from Aramaic Parishea, which means separated or separatist, which is an interesting one there, corresponding to the Hebrew parush, or from parash, he separated. The extent, yeah, so it's all very interesting. Extended meaning any self-righteous person, formalist, a hypocrite, scrupulous, etc. Okay, so there's going to be a surprise,
Actually,
folks.
that aligns so well with Islam.
Yeah, tell me more. In what sense? Where you say the idea of being separate? Or
Ostentatious observer are the outward forms of religion without regard to its inward spirit.
yes, yeah. Very much, isn't
The
it?
Sharia, I mean, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It doesn't really matter where your heart is at. It's all about if you do the external acts. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so a little bit further, look at how it's pronounced here, Pharisee. Okay, that's in the phonetics. We can see the Aramaic there, Priseia, which is actually the plural of it, and then you have the Greek and the Latin and so forth, and Pharisee. From Aramaic, it is given with a P, Priseia, while in Greek it takes on an F sound, Phariseos. Okay. Now, it should be pointed out there's a surprising confusion as to its correct etymology. So this is taken from another text here. Pharisee is derived from ancient Greek Phariseos, and from Aramaic parisa, and plural pariseia, meaning set apart, separated, related to Hebrew paros, plural parasim. The kale passive participle of the verb paras. Okay, this may be a reference to their separation from the Gentiles, etc. Now, if you go down a little bit further there, you'll see that scholar Thomas Walter Manson.
What about separation from the Orthodox Jewish group?
Yeah. Scholar Thomas Walter Manson and Talmud expert Louis Finkelstein suggest that Farsi derives from the Aramaic words parsa, or parsa again, meaning Persian or Persianizer, based on the demonym Parsi, meaning Persian in the Persian language, and further akin to Parsa and Fars. So that now that's quite a connection. Now, some
Persianizer, but in the New Testament you have the Judaizers.
yes, yeah, absolutely. So if we look at the Persian word Farsi and we look at the alternative term Pharisee, we can see that there's barely a breadth between the two. And I would argue, despite the fact that the they have come to us etymologically on different paths. I would suggest that this is not accidental. That the Jewish term Pharisee was constructed probably via Hebrew or Aramaic to be close to Farsi. Okay, I hope that makes sense to people.
Look at what Hussein Daoud says. Yes, the Persians also pronounce the letter tha as sa. That is where the Pakistanis get it, as they were Islamized by the Persians and Persianized Turks.
Yeah. So I think that this is why I think this happened. My solution is that the Jewish leaders cleverly coined this word for themselves as an ingenious pun on the people among whom they lived, the Pharisees. They would be separate from the Pharisees, hence be the Pharisees amongst the Pharisees. Any clever person, any intelligent person can make really clever puns, and I think this pun is still there, despite the fact we're seeing it through the word coming down through through Greek and through Latin.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
the same idea. No, the Sufis. Everyone says it's wool. Okay, it refers to suf, meaning wool, which is the clothes they wear, and I don't buy that for a second, because the Sufis make a joke. They say they are the Sufists, which is a play on the word sophists.
Ah, yeah, same kind of
and
thing.
Suf for wool would be pulling the wool over your eyes. So that's the joke that I see.
Yeah, that's a very revealing joke there. Yeah. And actually, A.J. Juice would argue that this type of coding of language was typical among the Talmudic writers. It's just part of the game that they play to conceal certain things and reveal other things.
But the Talmud is written in code. The Talmud we see has been exegeted and expanded, because typically the Talmud is a few scattered words, say 10 words in a paragraph, right? And then that'll be turned into 60, 50 words by a translator. But really the Talmud is very, very sparsely written. So it is coded to begin with.
And each coded word is dense in terms of it's heavily laden with meaning. That's why it takes like decades to become an expert in it. So perhaps in Jewish writings, those labeled Persian may not in fact be Persian, but Pharisee. So it's a kind of a misdirection. You might see, they're talking about Persians. No. It's always about Jews. Ultimately, if you're talking about Jewish texts, that's obviously their main interest, main focus. We must be on guard when we hear that Persians founded the Arab rebellion. It may be the Jewish leaders associated with the Babylonian academies is where I would go.
Also, when I did the Sharia thing, it said that eventually, once they'd absorbed everything from the Jewish scholars that they needed, once they'd effectively duplicated the Talmud into the Sharia, they effectively wiped out the Jewish community, and those that weren't killed were absorbed into Islam.
Yes, that actually makes a lot of sense. The analogy that came to mind for me today is, if you imagine someone starting up a train and then it becomes like a runaway train. So like Islam is kind of like a Jewish runaway train. They've lost control of it. It's under new management, as it were. I think that makes a lot of sense. Because like if you just think about this, there were millions of Jews living in Iraq. Where have they gone to?
Exactly.
No one ever no one ever explains that. Why there was no genocide in Iraq that we're aware of. If there was, I'm sure we would hear about it. So they have to have gone somewhere. So the most obvious explanation would be they simply changed their beliefs and became Muslims.
Maybe we should tell the audience that at the moment, would I be correct in saying you're not making any definitive statements? We're presenting some evidence and hypothesizing here. So we're not saying it is like this, it is like that. We're trying to tie it to other things that we know. So we don't want to overstate things, but we're trying to make sort of playing on connections, because we think there's something here that needs to be fleshed out further.
And I think the beauty of doing a hypothesis and putting it out there is, it creates the possibility of others seeing other connections or discovering other pieces of evidence. But if we keep it to ourselves and don't say anything about our ideas, it might be that actually someone is sitting on another little factoid piece of evidence that could actually fill up the
Urdu
picture a
is
little bit.
derived from Farsi, so the alphabets and pronunciation are similar.
Yeah.
Now that's interesting because there's a great deal of Sharia material, Islamic material in Urdu that's never been translated.
I didn't know
And
that.
the Shia writings are also not translated, and that's Sunni stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting actually if when all of that is translated, I'd say that there's an awful lot hidden, just simply because it hasn't been translated yet. Okay, so let's go from there. So if this coining is correct, then the words Persian and Farsi can be used as potential code words for Babylonian Jews, example, the Exilarch or the Geonim, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. So we can now test this hypothesis with an example. What of Salman al-Farsi? Actually, is that Salman? I think it should be Salman al-Farsi. I think I may mistype it there.
Amen.
Let me just change that. Lest I be accused
So
of...
Salman the Pharisee.
Oh, what did I do there?
Interesting. So Salman the Pharisee, that would be very interesting. But the thing is that in the Sharia narrative, they were learning from and taking from and being assisted by apparently Jews that moved over to their camp.
Yeah, like even this is the nice thing about it is actually even the Islamic tradition does acknowledge some of
Salman the Pharisee, and these
Yeah.
are very literalists. I mean, these are
Yeah.
wow. Is this
Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah. So is there anyone in the historical record that could form a match for him? We need someone of significance between 610 and 632, according to the Sins timeline. Now, this timeline is admittedly maybe off to misdirect us, but it gives us a ballpark around which to work. Now, if we think back to what the Islamic website said about Salman al-Farsi, he was a highly educated person. Okay, he's able to do this, that, and the other. At a time when a lot of people were illiterate. Okay, so who would fit the bill? But maybe someone who works in an academy would be ideal as a candidate. Okay, so we see that the 37th Exilarch is called Shalom, precisely in the period 614 to 640, which corresponds, it overlaps by a large bit the period that we just mentioned. He was straight after Nehemiah II, the 36th Exilarch, who was the Persian governor of Jerusalem, at least very briefly. Nehemiah was obviously involved in the conquest of Jerusalem in 640. Okay, and a lot of this material that I'm going to be sharing with you is from a paper, as you can see below. It's written by two Jewish scholars. Okay, obviously very important to get sort of the inside scoop. Now, one of the deficiencies in this paper is they sort of accept the standard Islamic narrative, but they're still giving us knowledge of Jewish history while still accepting the standard Islamic narrative. So it's kind of a mixed bag. So if you do read the paper, you kind of have to read it with a critical eye. Now you notice there are three people: Nehemiah II, his brother is Shalom, and then Yaqub of Syria is the nephew, and he's proposed as Kab al-Ahbar. Okay. Who is someone that's in the Islamic tradition that I'm not very familiar with as of yet. Have you heard of Kab al-Ahbar?
I'm gonna look him up right now.
Yeah, yeah,
How about
yeah. I'll hang on there. So, so as you can see, there's a bit of the standard Islamic narrative mixed in with the history, so it's a bit of overlap between the two. So by sharing this, I'm not suggesting that I accept all of the assertions on this, but certainly it's interesting that the 37th Exilarch has a name that you could potentially see as fitting with Shalom. Okay, Salman Farsi. Any look there?
I just found something, but I need more time to go because I mean this is all new to me.
Absolutely. I'm dropping you in the deep end here with this.
Yeah, suddenly. So I haven't
yeah.
seen the slides.
Yeah.
But there's mention here. I'm not. Yeah, it's hard to find it. It's hard to find it on short notice like this.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
see. But let me see what I find, and I will
Yeah,
come
yeah.
back.
We'll come back to it. Okay. So the Babylonian Jewish exilarch Nehemiah ben Huziel was the 36th exilarch, and his brother Shalom was the 37th. Nehemiah was also the Persian governor of Jerusalem, very briefly. Note that the Persians placed a Jew in such an important position that gives you a sense of how, what's the word for it, how much they held the levers of power in Persia. One of the reasons being, of course, is that the Jews were highly educated, very smart individuals, very capable. So it makes sense that the Persians would trust them with such a role. Now, the Persians and Jews conquered Jerusalem in 614 AD. This should be nothing new. So I'm just going to recall some of the key facts here. The remnants of the Hebrew people took in hand their native zeal, wrought very damaging slaughters among the multitude of believers. Going to the Persians, the Jews united with them. At that time, the army of the king of Persia was stationed at Caesarea in Israel. The Jews and the Persians were joined by Benjamin of Tiberias, a man of immense wealth, who enlisted and armed additional soldiers. The Tiberian Jews, with those of Nazareth and the mountain cities of Galilee, marched on Jerusalem with the Persian division commanded by Sharbaraz. Later, they were joined by the Jews of southern Israel and supported by a band of Arabs. The united forces took Jerusalem by storm in July 614 AD. Okay. Now, what happened then?
Okay, so all the recensions insist that Bahira, who is the supposed Christian monk, right, a Syrian monk called Bahira, who
Yeah.
taught Muhammadan Christianity, was in
Yeah.
the end corrupted by others, most notably by the famous early Jewish convert to Islam, Ka'b al-Ahbar, thereby accenting an anti-Jewish dimension already. So this is a mention of
Yeah.
this guy's. He's an early
Okay.
Jewish convert to Islam.
So he's painted in the standard Islamic narrative as a convert to Islam, whereas it
Yes.
more than likely he was never a convert to Islam. He was just plain forward
Died
Jew.
652.
Yeah. So he was in the upper echelons of Judaism at the time. There's no way I can see him ever becoming a Muslim.
And that's in Al-Kindi.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So the Jews massacred Christians. This is significant in terms of what happened next, in terms of the reaction, and you know, it's one of the key components of the dynamic of history that happens this time. So the Christian rhetoric has the Persians, together with the Jews, sweeping through Israel, destroying the monasteries which abounded in the country, and expelling or killing the monks. Bands of Jews from Jerusalem, Tiberias, Galilee, Damascus, and even from Cyprus united and undertook an incursion against Tyre, having been invited by the 4,000 Jewish inhabitants of that city to surprise and massacre the Christians on Easter night. The expedition, however, miscarried as the Christians of Tyre learned of the impending danger and seized the 4,000 Tyrian Jews as hostages. The Jewish invaders destroyed the churches around Tyre, an act which the Christians avenged by killing 2,000 of their Jewish prisoners. The besiegers, to save the remaining prisoners, withdrew. Okay, and so as a repercussion of this, the Roman response was swift to counter the Jewish insolence. There was the largest ever meeting of Merovingian bishops, I've probably mispronounced that, the Fifth Council of Paris in Gaul. They decided all Jews holding military or civil positions must accept baptism together with their families. Massive Jewish persecutions began to occur throughout the Roman Empire. Now, the Doctrina Jacobi references that forced conversion of Jews. It was obviously quite a significant event.
Okay.
Okay.
Also,
and
Ka'b, apparently there's a hadith.
yeah.
It's a bit late, but there's a hadith about him, and he says that every event that has taken place or will take place on any foot of the earth is written in the Old Testament, which Allah revealed to his prophet Moses. So that, I mean, you don't know whether this is true or not, but
Yeah.
this is what's said.
Oh, and is
So
it put in his mouth? Is it that he said this?
supposedly, I just dropped it. I just
Yeah,
dropped the text verbatim into the chat there. It's lost. So I mean, so the Old Testament does not have a record of all events past and future. So, and he counts the days of Caliph Umar. He does. This is in a Shiite encyclopedia
yeah,
on Kabul Umar. So apparently, this guy has said a lot. I
yeah.
mean,
And interesting that they're quoting someone who we can say with nearly 100% certainty was Jewish through and through, and very unlikely converted to anything else. He, because of his position, he was like the nephew of the Exilarch. Why would he convert to any other religion? It just doesn't make sense.
and
But
Ali doesn't like him.
yeah. So the story goes on that the distrust between the Jews and Khosrow reached its lowest point as the Jews said that Khosrow had acted treacherously and plotted the assassination of Nehemiah. There arose great discord between the allies, which ended in the deportation of many Jews to Persia, which might be the trigger for the story of the Hijrah, perhaps. Shalom, Nehemiah's brother, was sold into slavery until his redemption 10 years later. I think we need to be on guard whether Shalom really was made a slave. That doesn't really make sense to me. It seems like a classic motif. Joseph was sold into slavery. It's a bit too neat. But there might be truth to the idea of the deportation of Jews towards or to Persia. Now, the 10 years thing could be a common motif. There's the Muhammad was sent into exile and then returned. I think it's 10 years later, if I'm not mistaken. So I think these are common motifs. Any thoughts on that? No.
I don't know enough about this, to be honest. I mean, you're
Yeah.
surprising me with some of the stuff. I
Yeah.
haven't seen
Yeah.
all the slides, so.
No problem. No problem.
But yeah,
Okay. So a tentative conclusion. Shalom's position as Exilarch from 614 until 640 does appear to be the origin of the Salman al-Farsi character, as far as we can tell. Particularly as an Exilarch, he would be a rabbinical Jew, i.e. a Pharisee. So that's the key thing. If he was from the Exilarch, or he wasn't an Exilarch, that he has to be a Pharisee because of it was the Pharisees that were involved in the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, so I think he's the right person with the right name in the right place at the right time. But he had to be remembered. He had to be acknowledged in the Islamic tradition. But obviously, a story has been spun. And where do they position him? They position him with Muhammad way down in Mecca, which is baloney. Now, if there was a Muhammad, he wasn't down in Mecca. He had to be with Salman al-Farsi, which would place him in places like Jerusalem and in Iraq. Okay.
is it? I don't know how important this is Kabul Ahmad, but he's in AJ Deuce's paper as well, the Serpent King, and he's asked where they should place the Temple Mount. So this is in Ibn Taymiyyah describes it, and then he's asked by Caliph Umar or something, where do we place this? And then he advises Umar or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that one. Yeah, I've read that paper before, but I wasn't aware of it. At least my memory doesn't remember it. But yeah. So I think hence we could say that Salman al-Farsi is Shalom the Pharisee. So that's the point there. For good measure, located back in what can be considered part of the Persian Empire, he is simultaneously al-Farsi, the Persian, in a literal sense as well. Okay. Now, having established that, at least tentatively, a new possible insight is possible into a Chinese source. Okay, this is one that I've mentioned a lot of times before. This was given to the Chinese Tang court in 651, and it was then recorded in a collection in 945 AD. And the envoy was possibly a Jewish envoy, considering the the role of Jews at that time. Dashi situates in the west of Persia. Now, for those who are not familiar, Dashi is the Chinese way of saying Tayaye, which is a massive tribe that existed in Iraq and parts of Syria as well. So the Dashi situates in the west of Persia during the year of Daye, which is a Chinese emperor, 605 to 618 AD, of the Sui dynasty. There was a Persian man herding camels in the mountain Jufen Modina. Now, the problem with this story, it's very hard to decode because it's using a lot of symbolic references, and it's not as straightforward as just a literal text. Now, if we have an envoy being sent to China and they're given this message, there's a good chance that they have coded it so that they're not revealing too much, but while at the same time revealing enough. So my suggestion here is what it actually really means is when it talks about Persian man, it's actually a Pharisee. So there was a Pharisee leading Arabs, i.e. camels, in the Kufa Academy. So Jufen refers to Kufa. Modina is city, so it's Kufa's city, and the mountain is the mountain of learning, so therefore the Kufa Academy. Do you want to comment on any of that? Perhaps the bit about the camels.
So within the Sira, you'll find that they speak of the Christians as the people of the donkey. There's some reference to that because Jesus came riding on a donkey. The Christians ride donkeys, but the Muslims ride camels. That's something that they refer to themselves as. We are the camel riders. And so this is how they leading Arabs or camels. So that could mean Muslims.
Yeah. So I think this is if we can trust the interpretation here, and this is very tentative, folks. Okay, so this is as far as I can get it at this stage, but it would appear that what the message that they're saying to the Chinese is that there is Jewish leaders that are leading the Arabs at that time through their academies. So they're basically guiding them. So that's the herding camels is the way it's put.
Right.
And
if Donna is right, there was an ecumenical movement where they tried to have a movement of monotheists, and then eventually the Muslims broke away. Then that also kind of leans in that direction.
Yes, yeah. Like one way that the Jewish leaders could have co-opted, let's say, the Arabs would be to persuade them that they are fellow monotheists, that the Arabs are from the line of Ishmael, and they have a common heritage through Abraham. And Sebius, if we can trust that Sebius's work is from the time, and there are question marks about the reliability of Sebius, but he does talk about something on those lines that the Arabs, the Jews met Muhammad and the rest of the Arabs, and they were taught about their common connections. So it's very similar idea. Okay, so I'm going to move on to part 2 now. So part 2 is, well, first of all, we're looking at a source of internal conflict within Judaism in that early part of the 7th century. This is from A.J. Juice's paper, The Quran as Primary Evidence, Sijjin and Genius. It's a very short paper, folks. I would highly recommend that you download it. It's fascinating. It's one that I overlooked until just a day or two ago. So he says that the first Gaon, now Gaon is the leader of Jewish Academy. So the first Gaon of Surah was Mar Rab Mar as of 609 AD. Since then, the Gaonim were in stark conflict with the other rabbinic Jews and also with Karaite Judaism. Karaite and Haran Jews acted as the heirs of Sadducee ideals, which would accept the Torah but reject the petrification of oral traditions as practiced by the Babylonians. The sectarian conflicts between Karaites and Rabbinic Jews in Alexandria of 641 AD attest to this important split. Thus, for as little as we know, and so this is kind of an inference that he makes, between 609 and 641, various Jewish groups were engaged in open conflict. Okay, so there's kind of like there's a backlash against the Babylonian Jews because of a difference over the fact that how would I put this? The Gaons were being set up in academies in Iraq, and it was taking away the power from what would traditionally been associated with Israel. So you had the Jewish Talmud and you had the power brokers there, but the power was being shifted eastwards into Babylon, or as traditionally might be called Babylon. And so there is historical references to the Karaites, which are very similar in their beliefs to Muslims, being in conflict with the Rabbinic Jews in Alexandria in 641. And that's interesting. 609 is also an interesting date as well, as we'll see in a second.
So the Babylonian Talmud is from Babylon, and the Sharia was primarily developed in Babylon.
Babylon, yes.
Isn't that weird?
Isn't it? Yeah. Now, should point out that the Jerusalem Talmud is kind of a misnomer, because it was the academy in Tiberias primarily that was involved in that one, but it was called Jerusalem Talmud for obvious reasons. So you can see that there's a kind of like, if you imagine that the Western Jews and the Eastern Jews are in conflict, they're like two lungs across the body, and in conflict with each other at that time. And yet at the same time, you have the key elements of the Quran are being written at this time, and then finally by the end of the century and into the 8th century, you have a Quran being written which references a lot of this conflict and the ideas from both camps. So, that can't be a coincidence, I would argue. And the other issue is the fact that if we still hold out hope that the Quran was actually written way down in Mecca, why would there be referencing events happening hundreds and hundreds of miles away up north? It doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense that it was being written way up there. At least that's my take. I know there's a Yemeni angle. Maybe you want to refer to the Yemeni angle before we go on.
I mean, it's not really so relevant, but it's just that that's been ignored. I mean, the reason it's important is Jeffrey's work, where Jeffrey states that scholars have been ignoring Africa and Southern Arabia. And in fact, scholars they constantly refer to South Arabia and never say the words Yemen. But there are numerous Yemeni references in the Islamic sources. And of course, the number of words in the Quran, there's 10 times more words from the south than there are from the area near Petra. 10 times more. So why do you have 10 times more words from that region and practices? I mean, there are obvious practices, there are obvious references and things that have gone into the Quran that come from that region, right? But none that we know of specifically from Petra.
Yeah. Now, undoubtedly, there would have been Jews in Yemen, like it's a big Jewish area.
It was a major Jewish, so I would think a heretical Jewish area, and they persecuted the Christians. That's why the Ethiopians went into Yemen to stop the Jews from killing the Christians. Or something like that.
Yeah. So my angle would be that the people writing the Quran are obviously very aware of the events happening up north. I would posit as a potential hypothesis to join both the northern and southern idea is that
that's what I've said. I mean, they've taken from everywhere. I've said that. I'm not disqualifying the northern thesis at all. I'm just saying we need to add this as well. And this information comes earlier.
Yeah,
it comes before the rest of it.
I would say that probably what you have is there are people from Yemen, certainly in contact with the north, or maybe on a mission.
They were traveling to Rome. They were traveling to Greece. They were traveling to possibly as far as China. They were trading with India. They were major seafarers as well as trading on land.
Yeah.
And
I think
Himyarite
that's
Kingdom of Yemen was Jewish, he says. And don't forget, you've got the references after the invasion, the Ethiopian Christians, they were using the term Muhammad in their inscriptions to refer to Jesus and God.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's the earliest references we see to Muhammad before
yeah,
Muhammad, and they're all references to Christian deity. They're
yeah.
not.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, in I mentioned the 523 AD reference to Mahmud, which was a Jewish reference. So
Yep,
it makes,
MHMD. Yeah.
yeah, so it makes perfect sense that that there was a group or a number, let's say, of Jews from there that brought that up, and why you find in the 7th century all these coins with Mahmud mentioned. You know, it
Hmm.
seems to have the references to Mahmud suddenly emerge in the 660s as well, which is interesting. There wasn't any signs of that earlier than that, at least in the coins. So it seemed to be like a novelty that kind of came in. So it would make sense if they had come up from Yemen. But in any case,
Yeah, and also the style of construction of the Kaaba is like the style of construction of some Ethiopian places of worship. So there's that.
there's that. Yeah, yeah, excellent. Thanks, Lloyd.
Yeah.
So the Quran reflects some of these quarrels, and just like the Talmud recounts different opinions, the Quran sometimes criticizing one side, sometimes the other. I don't know if this was something that occurred to you whenever you've read the Quran. It's that it has a very dualistic kind of feel to it, like it's got two points of view on everything. And I think it's kind of like the Talmud in the sense that in the Talmud it gives you lots of different opinions. Rabbi so and so says this, whereas Rabbi X says that, and then they finally come to some resolution. That's usually how the Talmud. So it's very similar to that, for what it's worth. Okay. So the first Gaon of Surah was Mar Rab Mar, as of 609. In Islamic tradition, Muhammad gets his first revelation in 610 AD. Is there um, is there a comment being made in the choice of that year in the traditions, a reaction to the Gaonim system by the Karaite and Haran Jews, perhaps? Note the divisions of the Quran are also called surahs. So is there, there's a lot of things there that we could perhaps go, that's interesting. We're maybe not drawn too much conclusions yet, but it's kind of
Yeah,
interesting as
well,
we,
I wrote a surah, write a surah like it. Maybe the surahs were written in surah.
yeah, that would make logical sense, wouldn't it? Like, you know, like
And surah also means degree, right? It also is a reference to a degree of knowledge,
yeah,
a level.
I'd imagine that each of the academies would have called their documents after themselves. You can imagine it's like headed note paper, you have the Nehardia, you have the Surah, you have the Pompadita. So it's just an idea. There's certain, I think it's too much of a coincidence. I think we shouldn't just dismiss it offhand. But in any case, the Babylonians replaced the Jerusalem Nasi with a number of functionaries, which no doubt would have caused friction amongst the Jews who favored the Nasi. Okay. Um, and so this is a bit about the replacement of the Jerusalem Nasi. Note what these rabbinic judges are called: Dien and Dianim. The Babylonians replaced the Jerusalem Nasi with the Ab Bet Den, which is the father of the court or chief of the court, the Rosh Bet Dien, head of the court, the Dayan, which is the rabbinic judge, plural Dayanim, and Chaver Beit Dien, friend of the court, or experts in law or science. The date of cessation of the Semika is unclear, but also
Yeah.
irrelevant.
And
However,
interesting, Deen and Deen are shared across Islam and Judaism as well, because Deen means law in Hebrew.
yeah, yeah. However, if the Semika and the Nasi had died out at some point in the 5th century, they would likely be resurrected at another, in particular with the beginning of the Gaonim. Schisms between Jewish academies over the leadership of the Nasi are well documented in the Talmud. Now, viewers may have noticed that there is a slight similarity there between Dien or Dean and Jen, Djinn. Not quite there, but it's very, very close, and it might suggest a common root. And we'll explore that a little bit later.
Well, if you've got Dean, you might also, the D sometimes was a th. So Dean, thin,
Yeah.
which maybe could lead towards that direct, and the J, the.
Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, it's
Yeah.
speculative. Look, I mean, speculative. We're
Yeah.
just throwing some things out, but yeah,
Yeah.
this is all. I mean, it's just making me go like, this could be something. You know?
Yeah. So it's interesting that these deans are all involved in the Jews.
And Islam is called the Deen. Sorry, you've gone silent. Mel, you're on mute. Anybody hearing Mel? Anybody? Is it me or is that Mel? Mel, can't hear you. No sound, Mel. Sorry about that. Yeah. Are you guys hearing me?
To the little meeting. Just look at Talut first.
Mel,
And then I'll bring.
Mel, can you hear me? You disappeared for like 2 minutes there. We didn't get any audio
Oh.
from you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we do now. You disappeared after my last comment to you.
Okay. Did you lose me on this slide or previous slide?
Previously.
Okay. Did you hear me at
Before
this?
Before that.
Oh,
This
really?
one. We
This
lost you
one.
here at the end of this one.
Ah, okay. Oh, sorry about that, folks. I had a loose wire there and I wasn't aware. Okay, so I'll probably maybe just I don't know where I left off on this.
After just at the end of this one, you
Yeah.
disappeared. Yeah.
Okay, so I just point out that in addition to Surah on the map here, you have Haditha. It seems too much of a coincidence that there's an academy called Haditha. If the Surah Academy potentially is involved in writing the surahs, potentially the Haditha Academy could be associated at some level with the writing of the Hadiths. You know, that's just a possible.
So the place where they wrote the surahs and the place where they wrote the hadithas.
Yeah, all on the same river, on the Euphrates River. You know, it's too much of a coincidence. You know, it's really stretching the imagination. No, it's just a
Yeah, I have a
coincidence.
surah, maybe named after the place where that came from, and Haditha, another place where they wrote something else.
Yeah, which makes you think: are there Pompeditas somewhere else? Is there other books called I don't know whatever? You know, Moses. Yeah, you know, it really and you know if you just think about. You know, that area there in the center, like that was called the land of the pure blood in Judaism. That because that they believed that, you know, there was where you could find, you know, definite Jews, you know, with good pedigree, you know. And it's interesting that that's the area where Islam really emerges with their.
Someone says there's Kafir also on the map. Yeah, Kafir.
Yeah. Where'd you?
Yeah, true.
Oh yeah,
Kafir, just below Surah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I didn't see
Good
that.
catch.
Wow, that's good. That's good, man. Yeah. Actually, we'll be coming to Kafir a little. Actually, I think did we miss the Kafir bit? Oh, it's here. Yeah. Let's go on to here. We'll see Kafir actually mentioned here. So Galut and Talut. So we're going to look at these two, and I think I've decoded. They're actually references to Jewish leaders. So these are a rhyming pair you find in the Quran. So you have the Greek word exilarch, but the Hebrew version of it is Rosh Nagola. But it's more interesting in Aramaic, Resh Galuta,
Oh
which in
my
Arabic
gosh.
becomes Ras al Galut.
Ras
Quranic.
al Ghul, if you've watched Batman, the Ras al Ghul.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Oh man, the Ras al Ghul. I wonder if that's an actual thing besides just the movie reference. That is
Wow. I didn't know. I don't know what that is because obviously someone is in the know that knows it's probably a Jewish writer, maybe.
Ras al Ghul is a supervillain in American comics, but I wonder if it's got a reference to wow.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, obviously there's a very clever Jewish writer that put that.
Leader of the League of Assassins. I wonder, but
Yeah,
okay, they
yeah,
stole that from that. But
yeah.
I've seen science fiction writers borrow from like Gehenna, Jahannam, words like that, and they've named like enemy planets and bad places like that. But
Oh, yeah.
I
No, they love
wonder,
that stuff. Yeah, and it's only people who are fairly well educated that would actually know these references, and that's cool. So the Quranic Arabic says Jalut, but like it's pronounced Galut still in Egyptian Arabic, so that suggests that originally Jalut was Galut. And then if we look at Talut, then it's just the other part of the rhyming pair. I would suggest, and this is my suggestion on this one, that it's a play again on words. Okay, and it's to do with the Gaonim or the Pharisees. Talit is the Aramaic word from the root tll, meaning cover. So in Talmudic times, this already referred to the Jewish prayer or shol. So therefore, a talut is the guy who covers, i.e., the Pharisee. And we also have the word kafir. Kafir means coverers, kufar. And there's actually 491 occurrences of this in the Quran. So the suggestion I'm going to make is the talut refers to the Gaonim, the academy leaders, whereas the galut refers to the exilarch. And the jinn is actually another derogatory term for the Gaonim. Now, you mentioned to me before we went on the live stream something about the galuta. Do you want to mention about that? About
yeah, hold on. I just
Saul?
sent you two references, right?
Oh, actually, I think I have it on the next slide. Actually, no, or
Okay.
two slides. Yeah, so I'll come back to that. Actually, yeah. The Babylonian Gen or Deans even replaced the Jerusalem Nazi, hence the Quranic term Gen for them. That's the argument I would make, and there'll be a little bit more on that later. Now, this is
Is
what I got.
Nasi from Nasara?
Yes, yeah. Um, I would say so. Yeah, yeah. I
And
haven't
Dean,
looked.
experts in law of science. Yeah, Dean, experts in law of science. I mean,
Yeah,
again, it lines up that has a parallel to the Sharia, the Deen,
yeah,
which is the law,
yeah,
and the science, the
yeah,
Deen.
yeah. The Sarah, I never thought of making that connection. Actually, Nasi and Nasara, again in the Quran. So, like, if people want to say this is just a mad coincidence, well, it just seems to be an awful lot of coincidences, you know. So here, this is a passage you give me. Let me just say, this is the reference at the back that you got it from. On several occasions in his annals, Al-Tabari mentions the Ras al-Jalut, the exilarch or head of the captivity, who was the official representative of the Jewish community at the court of the Abbasid caliphs, and the Jewish counterpart of the Catholicos, who represented the Christians.
No, not the Protestanticos,
No, no, the Catholicos.
the Baptisticos. You sure?
Yeah, yeah.
The Calvinisticos. Sorry. Oh
Oh,
boy.
oh, yeah. The office of Exilarch had been instituted by the Sasanian kings of Persia and was continued by the Abbasids. In none of his references to his Jewish dignitary does Al-Tabari indicate what his functions entailed, and in one case he even anachronistically presents him as a contemporary of Jesus and Pilate. So, do you know what's interesting about this? I don't know who wrote this. Do you know by any chance? It's referring to Al-Tabari. It's some book about Al-Tabari, is it? That you, I don't know if you know offhand, but
Golly, hang on, let me get that for you. It was Jalut, right?
yeah. But you know the mad thing about this is I worked out that Jalut refers to the Exilarch by the craziest pathway. I looked at the 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights, and how did I get to it at all? Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't Galut. Let me see. How did I get? Well, initially it was. No, actually, initially it was Jinn. I worked out that the Jinn was a reference to the Gaon name, so that's how I got there first. But it was because of the genie in the bottle, because the Gaon means genius, and of course the word genius I thought of as genie in the bottle. The Arabian Nights is set in Babylon, so that's how it got to jinn being a reference to that. And then it was then when I thought about galut, I started wondering about I thought about the word galut and said, I wonder has that got some connection. And
so that source,
yeah. So by a strange path anyway, I got to the idea of it meaning Exilarch. So I'm just amazed that actually it's just confirmed that it is actually reference to the Exilarch.
Right, the jinn. But we spoke about, remember that reference I gave you on the jinn, the Chthonian. Hold on. So it's Muslim writers on Judaism and the Hebrew Bible from Ibn Rabban to Ibn Hazm by Kamla Adang. It's a Brill publication.
Yeah.
And so it's from Brill. And it's in the Islamic Philosophy, Theology, and Science Texts and Studies, edited by H. Daber and B. D. Pingree, Volume 22. So it's quite a long title.
Yeah.
So Islamic Philosophy, Theology, and Science Texts and Studies, Muslim Writers on Judaism and the Hebrew Bible, Ibn Rabban to Ibn Hazm by Kamla Adang.
Wow.
So that's in a scholarly Brill journal.
Yeah, so that's a pretty reliable one. So there we have it. Galut is the Exilarch. Why is supposedly a prophet down in the Hijaz in Mecca writing about the Exilarch? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so moving on from there. This is from A.J. Juice's paper. I'm going to be, from here on, I'm going to be using quite a bit from his paper. He says that one could argue that a continuance of the Talmudic traditions at Jerusalem, Tiberias, and Caesarea probably also translates to a continuance of the Babylonian traditions, whichever they were at the time. We do know that Anbar and Nehardea was one of the oldest academies, and they were opponents of Pompedita. The Gaonim were their supreme judges in the era of Gaonim, beginning in 589 AD and into the Abbasid era. The first Gaon of Surah was Mar as of 609. Since then, the Gaonim were in stark conflict with the other rabbinic Jews and also with Karaite Judaism. Karaite and Haran Jews acted as the heirs of Sadducee Ideals, which would accept the Torah but reject the petrification of oral traditions as practiced by the Babylonians. The sectarian conflicts between Karaites and rabbinic Jews in Alexandria in 641 AD attest to this important split. Thus, for as little as we know, between 609 and 641 AD, various Jewish groups were engaged in open conflict. So obviously, we've seen some of that quote. I'm giving you the longer reference to it now to see it in full context. Hopefully that makes some sense to you all. Okay, so we can see that there was a conflict among Jews at that time. Now, going on from there, there's a reference to the Sijjin in the Quran. Now, do you notice something in the word Sijjin, Lloyd, by any chance?
S-I-D-J-I-N and another N. It looks like jinn.
Yes, yeah. There is a connection there. So this is brilliant stuff. This is AJ Juice now. So I'm just going to read from it. He says, Surah 83:7, those who stand, contains a passage that is believed to be a prison in hell, Sijjin. Okay, this is to misread it, obviously. Yes, the register of the wicked is in Sijjin, and who shall make thee understand what Sijjin is? It is a book distinctly written. Now, Muslims interpret it to mean hell, but it's actually saying directly it is a book distinctly written. The counterpart of the Sijjin is explained only a few verses later from Quran 83:17, believed to be an apartment in paradise, Illiyun, right? But the register of the righteous is in Illiyun. And who shall make thee understand what Illiyun is? A book distinctly written. The angels who draw nigh unto God attested. So you have these. Sijjin is one book, and Illiyun is another book. These are not paradise and hell as Muslims interpret it. That they've got it wrong. They have to go back to that. And in order to understand this, as we'll see in a second, you have to actually look at the Talmuds. Okay. Any thoughts on that before we go further?
Interesting. I'm just trying to look up. I just looked up Sijjin. There's a handful of references. The Brill.
Yeah.
I wonder I should look up see what Brill says about that. But I remember we've mentioned in the past that that also related Ifrit comes from the term Ifrit in Islam is a word that means cunning, insubordinate, powerful but nasty, right?
Yes, I
And
remember
it's
you.
rebellious, and it also means underground demons. It means demons.
Yeah.
But Ifrit seems to derive from the Hebrew Ivrit, which means a Hebrew, for the first
Yes.
Jews.
Yeah. So this is like
Maybe I have to show that quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. Let me come out of here for a second, and let's
Just going to show it just for a moment.
Mhm.
Entire screen. Let me just do my screen. There you go.
Let me just, okay. Ifrit. So it means Hebrew.
So it comes Ivrit.
Okay.
Ivrit was an appellation given to Abraham as the
Mhm.
first Jew. Abram, he was Abram Ha-Ivri. He became Abraham the Ifrit, the
Yeah.
Ivrit, right?
Yeah.
And then of course then you suddenly get Ifrit referring to the Jews here.
Yeah.
You know, Abraham, this would be as a jinn of enormous size, formed from smoke, lives under the ground. So it's a derogatory term. It seems to be derived from Ivrit for Hebrew.
And so the
Calling them
original
jinns.
So Ivrit originally meant like Hebrew. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they kind of distorted it a little bit
I
and
think
make it like a cunning demon.
Yeah, a cunning demon, exactly. They were demonizing the Jews quite literally.
Yeah. Now, I'm obviously not been watching the chat. I hope everyone is enjoying what we're saying. What is it? I just referenced it. Comment here. Mel is not fear man. You should tell me about this live. Oh, it's not fair, man. Okay, sorry about that. Did you miss it? Okay.
Yeah.
No. So, going to go back to where we left off. Tell me if is it loaded up?
Yeah,
properly
showing.
then?
Yeah.
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 Okay. So where we left off was Sijjin is the register of the wicked, and the register of the righteous is Illiyun. Okay. Pardon me. So it's Sijjin versus Illiyun. So that's our clue. Now, A.J. Juice says, from an academic perspective, taking the text simply for what it says, a book was opposed by the authors of the Quran that was written in a place dubbed Sijjin. The counterpart refers to a place by the name of Illiyun, where another book was written. The latter was supported by the authors of this surah. Okay? Now, what book or what books could be important to Jews? What would be the most obvious books? I would suggest there's two opposing books. They shouldn't be really opposing because they're meant to be complementary to each other. But you have the Jerusalem Talmud and you have the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, so that would be the obvious one. But let's see.
Well, Talmud versus Sharia and Torah versus Quran, right?
Yeah, you have that. Yeah. But actually, we'll see where it goes here. Let's have a look. So first of all, we need to understand what we mean by register. It's both books have in common that they were places acted as a register, were distinctively written, and are obviously not the Quran. A register is perhaps an institution that records distinct events, such as, for example, a court of law. In a religious context, one might speculate that it refers to different religious headquarters or assemblies, councils that record their decisions. So that's what's meant by a register. So like a Sharia court would register a decision that they make on a particular dispute, for example. The same would have been done by Jews in their courts. Okay, so that's what's meant by a register. Okay. Now, he goes on to say that the sentiments were strong enough that the registers of Sijjin and Illiyun merited entry into religious scripture. Since these books were distinctively written, perhaps referring to a codified symbolic language, it is perhaps safe to reduce the search for the meaning of the passages to the religious contenders within the geographical reach of the authors of this surah. Okay, so I've got two maps there. The map on the left represents those who associated with the Jerusalem Talmud, and the map on the right, those who associated with the Babylonian Talmud. This is what I'm going to. Was this what AJ?
Illiyun, hold on, the Bani Israel, the Israeliyat. You had the Israeliyat.
Very good.
It's the
Yes.
Israeliyat, but that was part of the Jewish Hadith, and then they threw them out and wrote their own Hadith. They borrowed the Jewish stuff because at one time they were using the Israeliyat,
Yeah.
and then they wrote their own Hadith and tossed the Israeliyat out. So Illiyun, shortened version of Israeliyun. Like, yeah, the yun means a group.
Yeah. Excellent, man.
Kafirun, you know, the yun.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah. Very good. So he goes on to say that Sijjin also appears to contain the root of the word jinn, which you correctly spotted. In simple terms, understood to be the malicious spirits of the Muslims. It is a word that is used in the Quran countless times. One such representation can be found in Surah 7183, where it puts in contrast to Prophet Muhammad. Will they not bethink them that their companion Muhammad is not jinn possessed? Yes, his office is only that of a plain warner. Okay, so let's remind ourselves of a special office. The Babylonians replaced the Jerusalem sorry, with the Ab Bet Din. Okay, so let's go a little bit further here. This is a warner against the jinns, heresies, or innovations. So he says, since an academic view cannot reconcile malicious spirits with what the text means to say in this passage, the danger of the Prophet Muhammad being possessed by the jinn relates quite clearly to heretical thoughts. In response, he, or rather his office, is portrayed as a plain warner, presumably cautioning against the dangers of the jinn's heresies. Do you get that?
Yeah.
So
but you know, Mel, this goes back. I bought a book some time ago, and there was a fascinating chapter in it that I meant to do a show on, which I should actually do. A lot of the allegory, a lot of the figures of speech and the language in the Quran derives from Arabic culture. And when you read Arabic poetry of the time prior to Muhammad, you read the poetry and the songs and the way the culture viewed the jinn, you would actually realize how much of that has seeped directly, the pagan Arab culture has seeped directly into the Quran and Muhammad's language and the imagery. So you realize that, and that's how they expressed. So for instance, to be a good poet, right, to be a world-class, a great poet, a Muslim, the pagans then had to be possessed by a jinn. You had to willingly allow yourself to be possessed, and that's how you became a great speaker. So that they would have used that figurative idea, even if they meant it differently, but that figurative use of language was common for them.
Yeah, I suppose the question is which came first. I think maybe this concept of jinn. I'm not sure yet, but I think they might have borrowed it from Jewish terminology, and then they've backdated all the references to jinn as evil spirits. Maybe I'm not 100% certain, but not sure yet. But part of me thinks maybe they've persuaded us to get it the other way around, but I'm not sure yet on that score. But I'll have to hopefully I'll try and work
let
out
me go and
which came
find that
first.
book. You're making me think now. I need to go back to that chapter and do a talk on it because
Yeah.
really fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go from there. Need to. Okay, I've done something wrong here. Let me just. What am I doing? Right, now we're back. Okay, so just want to point out that halakot, also spelled halakha, is the collective body of Jewish religious laws. I think you might have mentioned that word earlier on, actually.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. In the Babylonian Talmud, a saying seems to mirror the opposite opinion of the Quran. It was taught in the Tana Debi Eliyahu, whoever repeats halakot may rest assured that he is destined for the future world. As it says, his goings, halikot, that's kind of like a pun, are to eternity. Read not halikot, but halishot. I think that's the correct pronunciation. The halishot was the work of the Surah Academy of the Babylonian Talmud. It is well established that the Academy of Tiberias had been involved with providing troops to the Persian army for the conquest of Jerusalem in 614 AD. Thus, even though the Nasi might have been removed 2 centuries earlier, the Academy was alive and well under Sadducee beliefs in the 7th century. It was a participant. Okay. So he goes on to say that, however, we should find the parallel to the Babylonians in the Jerusalem Talmud. The decisions of Hillel, of Jerusalem, are law, and the transgressor of them, Babylon, merits death. Apparently, everybody was in agreement for the others to be expedited to hell. So he's basically saying that it's as if the Quran is arguing back with the Babylonian Talmud. You know, they're debating across the lines with each other, as it were. Okay. So the Illiyun is actually the Sadducees' Jerusalem Talmud. A.J. Juice says, thus we can reduce the second part of the riddle without addressing other linguistic possibilities. Ilia is an Arabic form of Elia, Capitolina, i.e. Jerusalem. Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. Elia, just where was Ilya? So hold on, because in Islam you have the awliya, who are the Sufis, who are the friends of Allah. That's interesting.
Mm.
The awliya, the ones who know God, the friends of God.
So this name for Jerusalem was given by Roman Emperor Hadrian. So it's kind of like it's one of those terms that we may have lost that sense because obviously the name has changed over the centuries. But the Quran's surah is straightforward. The Illiyun is the Tana Debi Eliyahu, the Jerusalem Talmud, from the Sadducees, the Levite Korahites in Tiberias. It is perhaps directly linked to the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem by Nehemiah in 614, 617 AD, and or its aftermath. Okay, so which is it, Illiyun or Sijjin? A choice of Talmuds, the Jerusalem or the Babylonian. So if we look at it again, what is the Quran arguing? Yes, the register of the wicked is in Sijjin. So it's arguing that the Babylonian Talmud is the register of the wicked, whereas the register of the righteous is Illiyun, i.e. the Babylonian Talmud. Does that make sense? That's what A.J. Juice has deduced, that it's actually saying our Talmud is better than your Talmud, In fact, your one will send you straight to hell, whereas the Babylonian Talmud is basically arguing that the Sadducees are the godless ones, okay? Now, he goes on to quote from the Babylonian Talmud, which contains a similar concept to the Sijjin. Okay, so this is, I'm going to read from this. You can see the reference there. In relation to the issue of distancing oneself from idol worship and prostitution, the Gemara relates, Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Jonathan were once walking along the road when they came to a certain two paths, one of which branched off towards the entrance of a place of idol worship, and the other one branched off towards the entrance of a brothel. One said to the other, "Let us go by the path that leads to the entrance of the place of idol worship." I think I've got this right. As the inclination to engage in idol worship has been slaughtered and the temptation to sin in this manner no longer exists, the other said to him, "Let us go by the path that leads to the entrance of the brothel and overpower our inclination and thereby receive a reward." When they arrived there, they saw that the prostitutes yielded before their presence, i.e., they entered the building out of respect for the sages. One said to the other, "From where did you know this, that the prostitutes would retreat from us in embarrassment?" He said to him, "It is written, from lewdness, mezima, it shall watch over you, discernment shall guard you," i.e., the Torah will serve as a safeguard against lewdness. So A.J. Juice interprets that to say that the text is trying to say that those that read the Torah hold the counsel of the wicked. It seems to be an allusion to the Sadducees who accept the Torah but reject the recording of oral law. Given the greater Jewish historical context, it can perhaps safely be assumed that the Mezima or Zima refers to the Jerusalem Talmudis. So it's very, like, if you to read that Talmudic passage, you'd be hard pressed to decipher what they're actually referring to. But A.J. Juice reckons that it's actually a criticism of the Jerusalem Talmudis, whereas the Quran is actually, given the counter argument, it's actually criticizing the Babylonian Talmudis. Okay. Both of these councils or registers do not seem to be related to the counsel of the wicked in the book of Psalms. While one can never be sure in biblical context there, the counsel is in the sense of not to listen to the advice of the wicked. In the Talmud and the Quran, these are active institutions of wickedness. Any thoughts on that? Are you there? Oops. Can't hear you. I can't hear you, and I don't know what happened. Let me just see if I can.
Oh, I'm on mute. Oh, good grief.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I muted myself. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't understand it well enough to make a comment, because some of the connections seem very arcane. He knows the material in a way that I don't.
Yeah.
I would need time to look at it and examine it
Yeah.
and read it for myself to really try to understand the connections.
It's very obscure.
But what I said was, it is kind of unclear, but it's not completely implausible, let's just say.
Yeah.
And given what I know of, that the Talmud had to be suppressed by the Jews because they had the Sharia now, and they had to suppress the Talmud, right? So that they needed to assert that, because they extracted what they could, developed their own idea of what the Talmud was in the Sharia, and then they had to get rid of the rest, because nobody knows where the Sharia comes from. It's a big secret, mystery, right?
Yeah. So let's just let's get back to here, and I think we're almost there.
Yeah, I need to go in a few minutes. It's getting late, and
apologies now. Let me just get to the end.
I'm an hour ahead of you, so
okay, so the argument he makes here is essentially the solo scriptura Sadducees have no God, says the Babylonian Talmud. The succeeding passages in the Babylonian Talmud shed some light over the meaning of the division between the two. Our rabbis taught when Eliezer ben Parata and Hanina were arrested, Eliezer said to Hanina, "Happy art thou that thou hast been arrested on one charge. Woe is me, for I am arrested on 5 charges. Hanina replied, Happy art thou who hast been arrested on 5 charges, but wilt be rescued. Woe is me, who though having been arrested on 1 charge will not be rescued, for thou hast occupied thyself with the study of the Torah, as well as with acts of benevolence, i.e. the written oral law, whereas I occupied myself with Torah alone. Okay, this accords with the opinion of Huna, for Huna said, He who only occupies himself with the study of the Torah is as if he had no God. You see the criticism of the Sadducee point of view, for it is said, Now for long seasons Israel was without the true God. What is meant by without the true God? It means that he who only occupies himself with the study of the Torah is as if he had no God, which is really quite surprising what they're saying from the Babylonian point of view. If you just are like a Sadducee, that it's the Torah only, you know, or the sola scriptura, you are as if you are like have no God. That's the way they took it. The conflict in the Babylonian Talmud seems to constitute an answer to the age-old Sadducee stance against the Pharisees. It simply means to say that the Sadducees have no God because they did not accept the recording of the oral law in the Talmud. So you can see there's a conflict there, and they're arguing with each other, one from the Babylonian Talmud and the other, from the Quran, apparently. Okay, so who is the Babylonian Talmud taking aim at? The Sadducees in Tiberias and Haran are the target of the Babylonian Talmud. A.J. Juice says, thus, identical to the Quran, there is a balance between the wicked and the righteous in between the two contenders, Jerusalem and Babylon. In the Quran, the register of the wicked is in Sijjin. This can hardly be a coincidence and likely concerns the same spiritual groups. Sijjin might thus be an allusion to the Arabic Sijil, meaning the record of a court of justice. Logically, Sijjin could be its negative form, i.e. injustice, to mock the wicked. So the register of the wicked is in Babylon, according to the Jerusalem Talmudists, whereas the Babylonian Talmudists would say, au contraire, the register of the wicked is in Jerusalem. So I think that's it. I think A.J. Juice is spot on here. So he says that the balance of Sijjin and Illiyun suggests 2 scriptural foundations. It seems inferred that the authors of the Quran were true to the Illiyun, the Jerusalem Talmud, and at least some of their opponents to the Sijjin of the Babylonians. The Gen refers to the Bet Din in Babylon.
The house of the Dean.
Yeah.
In Babylon.
And that's basically where I ended.
Interesting. Very interesting. I mean, there's a lot there. There's okay.
Lot to absorb.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in. True.
Yeah. So listen, yeah, I know it's late for you, so I'm gonna let you off, Lloyd. Thanks a lot for coming along. People, if leave your comments below the video today. Tell us what you think. Do you find the arguments that I've set forth? Well, actually, really, a lot of it is A.J. Juice's arguments. Hopefully, I've done justice to his papers and also the Jewish paper that I shared, and hopefully we've
I mean, there's circumstantial evidence that connects things. So the question is, can you flesh it out into more solid links? But there's definitely this is interesting. It opens up a line of investigation that says, look, there's more to this. Because before this, we didn't have any of this. We didn't, suddenly it's like, wait, hold on, you can trace a line now, because I've said it in the past, but now you've actually got a line from potentially the Talmud to the Sharia and the Jews to or heretical Jews to the Muslims.
Yeah. Like if we see a series of dots in a certain direction, we can form a line, reasonably, logically. We can make that inference. Obviously, there's a dearth of evidence. A dearth of evidence. We don't get as much evidence as we'd like. I know this is a classic one, but with the evidence that we've got, I think it's pointing in a certain direction. It's forming a pattern that we can deduce. Now, there are people who are watching that actually might want to still settle with the idea that there was a prophet in in Mecca, in the Hijaz. And fine, that's great. I just don't see how the historical context fits with that. That's where I stand. I think if we look at the historical context, I think we have to make a different
I mean,
narrative. You know,
the good research I've seen on the Sharia all points to Iraq.
yeah,
You know, it all
Yeah.
points to that region. It doesn't. I mean, look, sure, you can argue that there was some Roman law flying around, or maybe native law, or whatever, local law.
Yeah.
Sure, they picked up bits here and there, but the bulk of the development, the serious development, happened in Iraq.
Yeah. So I think if you imagine, like, you have all of these academies, they're like the equivalent of universities. There's a whole bunch of them. They're all bunched together in
At least a dozen, and most of them can't
Yeah.
be found anymore. They were so thoroughly
Yeah.
wiped out. Like, how
Yeah.
convenient, these Muslims, you know.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you look at A.J. Juice's last paper, we have actually found the round city of Babylon. It's a very compelling paper.
Now watch that stream as well.
Yeah. I've asked A.J. Juice to produce the Qibla lines to show that they all point towards this Pompedita, which is Babylon, and you can see the actual the round outline of the buildings of the city. So it means that the location of the mosque that's there was originally a Jewish academy, which means that you can now see the transition from Jewish academy to mosque, and then as you say, like what you mentioned about that Islam basically took over and wiped out the Jewish population, or at least converted them to this new religion. But listen, we'll stop it there. I know you need to get your
Yeah, I have a
sleep.
heavy day tomorrow. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a long day. So it's another one tomorrow.
Okay.
But cool stuff, Mel. Interesting. I mean,
Thank you very much.
definitely something here. So good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night.
See you
Take
all
care.
tomorrow night on a stream. I'll be exhausted, but I'll be here. All right.
Brilliant stuff. Thanks a lot.